Hello, fellow pilgrims. This is Dr. John, and this video aims to provide some preparation for our pilgrimage to Rome. Pilgrimage differs from a tour in that the traveler seeks a sacred destination, and through that journey, an experience of the divine. We are certainly traveling to a sacred destination, the city of Rome, rich in Christian history and still rich today as the home of the church. Indeed, it is the home of ancient paths, as described by the Lord in this passage from Jeremiah, where the Lord says, "Stand by the way and see and ask for the ancient paths, where the good way is, and walk on it. Then you will find a resting place for your souls." How each of us will experience the divine or find a resting place for our souls varies, but each of the sites we visit and the conversations we'll have provides touchstones, providing opportunities for this encounter. A priest friend of mine equated pilgrimages perhaps to buffets, meaning that we go through and sample a little bit of this and a little bit of that. This friend, though, would like to have spots where pilgrimages can be like sit-down dinners, where one can savor their meals. So my hope for this video, and maybe a few additional ones, is to provide some context so that you can better savor what we will experience. They aim to bring forth the good ways or the ancient paths, both those we see and those which lie beneath what we see. There are many historical periods to choose from that have accumulated in Rome, the eternal city. I've decided to focus on an early Christian period since some of the architectural sites that we'll be seeing relate to this 3rd to the early 5th century. I mentioned a few videos, and we'll see how many I can put together in the month of August here, because I'd like to make them short and for each to cover a specific time frame. I mainly discuss early Christian architecture, because that is what we will be seeing in some cases, or we'll be imagining because the early buildings have been built upon. We may only get to see a glimpse through ruins or a portion of an original building. The bird's eye view of this history is shown here in 4 periods. The first period is the time frame immediately before the Emperor Constantine becomes ruler in 312 AD. In this period, from the late 3rd century to 312, Christianity is not legal to practice. Christians gather and worship in homes and burial sites, in inconspicuous places that look like just any other place in Rome. The second period is an intense 25-year building program from 312 to 337, driven by the Emperor Constantine. He has Christian buildings built on imperial land and with imperial money. The third period is the mid to late 4th century, where Christians build Christian churches, many of which are on top of or relate to previous house churches. And lastly, the 4th period is the late 4th century and into the 5th, where the papacy asserts its governance, and churches are now built adopting the local classical Roman architectural style. My hope is that by uncovering this early Christian context, we can better appreciate foundational aspects of our faith in the pre-Constantinian era and its subsequent changes or growth in the periods that immediately follow. We are not touring these structures because of their antiquity, but we are pilgrims touching the foundations of our faith because this architecture tells a story of our faith. Ours is a living faith, so I'll end each video with a spiritual reflection related to early Christian architecture to help us appreciate God's actions at every stage of our faith growth, those in the past that we can see and the growth being asked of us today. For our first period, the period immediately before Constantine, let's provide some context. The empire is divided into 4 parts, a tetrarchy, each with its own emperor. And the emperors are not in Rome. They are on the borders of the empire, fighting off outside threats. Some call these the days of the mobile courts. However, Rome is still the heart of the empire, if not in substance, but in symbol. It is the home of the Senate, which has very little, if any, power during the imperial days of the empire. The population is in decline, with some experts saying that there's about 750,000 people within its walls. And important context for these 4 time periods relates to the Roman wall, a portion of which we will experience by walking in them and on top of them when we visit the City of Rome Museum. Some point out that these walls and their gates to this day are the greatest monument of late antiquity Rome. For our purposes, the walls are very important because Romans, including Jews and Christians, live within the walls, and they are buried outside the walls, 2 distinct practices of the faith. Also, the old Servian walls, built around the 4th century BC, marked in blue here, which encompass the 7 hills of Rome, were replaced by new walls, the Aurelian walls, marked here in red, in the years just before Constantine. First layer built in 272 AD and then further heightened in 309 AD, thus in this first time period that we're discussing now. Christians living in Rome lived in places just like the rest of the citizenry, where private wealth and squalid poverty lived close together. Lower to middle class Romans lived in insulae, buildings which housed many people. These were all over Rome, except in the sacred center of Rome, where the Roman Forum is located. Some estimate there's about 44,000 of these in the city, and they are quite close together. These brick buildings one shown here, provide shops on the lowest level, facing the pedestrian walkways, and small apartment dwellings above. The insulae were of many shapes and sizes, some rectangular, some square, some 3 stories, some 6 stories or more. And the fact is that the lower you were on the social scale, the higher you had to go in these buildings. Some middle to upper class folks lived in small to medium houses called domus, or private residences. These were also scattered throughout the city, except the sacred center, and the estimate is that there were probably less than 2,000 of these buildings. And last, for the very, very few in the upper class, you had the more sprawling villas. Within the city of Rome, at the time immediately before Constantine, many scholars believe there were somewhere between 20 and 25 Christian gathering places by the 4th century. Some say maybe a third of the population were either Christians or sympathized with the Christians. So there is a growing acceptance or tolerance to the religion in the city. These houses of the church were in insulae or in some domus locations. Christians owned their places of worship. Either a landlord owned the insulae or a private owner had a home that was big enough to maybe accommodate more people. In addition, some scholars describe additional dedicated worship spaces outside of personal homes that described as barn-like halls. These might be more akin to our strip mall churches, except they lack any conspicuous identification. One would not be able to identify any of these places from the outside at this time, and maybe not even on the inside. Christians shunned the public sphere and in their policy and in their buildings. In other words, they were not defined by external artistic or architectural expression of their faith, important as these might be. This map shows about 20 or so of these houses of the church within the recently built Aurelian walls, identified as these these black rectangles. 3 of these we will visit. The first one is San Clemente, which we will visit on day 3, and we'll be able to go down to the 3rd level of this structure and walk around a 1st century insula. The second one we'll see on our 7th day, we will visit Santa Sabina, built on the Aventine Hill. The remains of the more middle-class domus here are gone, but the basilica has been built on top of it. Also on the 7th day, we will visit San Crisogeno, and we will be able to go below to see the ancient 4th century basilica, which still has the remains of an earlier barn-like hall where the Christians gathered and worshiped. A review of Christian house churches would not be complete without mentioning the house church underneath the Basilica of Saints John and Paul, and located on the Salient Hill. It's not on our list to visit, but may be of interest if you want on one of your free afternoons. The museum underneath is run by the city of Rome and is quite developed, allowing you to walk around the 2 apartment houses or insulae. Many Roman citizens maintained the custom of frequent visits to burial grounds outside the city walls, visits which also included feasting or dining. It was a cultural practice in many ancient cultures that persists today, even in some parts of the world. I remember once in a visit to Tokyo, and I had an off day because they had a holiday in that culture, and in driving around the city with some friends, they pointed out to me what the people in Tokyo were doing. They were going out picnicking, and where were they picnicking but in the cemetery? Cemeteries were full of people partying and sitting on their blankets and eating. So it's a very different, it's a line from that to very ancient culture of doing these sort of visits in burial grounds. So these burial sites that are outside of the walls are like the homes within the walls in that there are many types. They're not just one single type. Some Romans, especially Christians and Jews, were buried in catacombs, pictured here. These underground structures allowed more people to be buried per square feet, given the expense of the land. But some might say that this is the equivalent of the insulae for the living. There were also open-air burial sites, like what we are used to in our cemeteries, 1 person per plot of land. And eventually some of these would become shrine centers or cult shrines for important people, either on that one single plot or related to the catacomb, or they were simply shrines to the gods, decorated above so that the family could make offerings and special prayers. This is for all the Roman citizens, not just the Christians. An important burial architectural design that might be hard for us to get our heads wrapped around and that was very common at that time in Rome, was the funerary hall. These structures were open-air pavilions, so they had some cover, allowing them protection from the weather, and they allowed more people to gather and honor and have their dinners and their funerary banquets. People were buried underneath the floor of these halls. So the ancients, unlike maybe us today, didn't have an aversion for walking over the grave of a person. Pre-Constantinian Christians buried and honored their dead according to local Roman customs. One would not be able to distinguish their burial sites and practices from their Roman neighbors. However, the Christian feasting or banqueting included Christian prayers, especially including the celebration of the Eucharist, and their visits included not only to family members and friends, but especially to honor and offer prayers to Christian martyrs, the Roman Christian martyrs. This map here shows, I think, around 38 Christian burial sites outside the cities of Rome, outside the walls of Rome at this time, marked by the red text. The catacomb burial practice was adopted by many Christians, especially those of lesser means, and we will visit one of these south of the city off the Appian Way, the catacombs of St. Calixtus, on day 6. This picture is a reproduction of the shrine center of St. Peter, buried outside the northern walls in the cemetery at the base of the Vatican Hill, which we will visit on our 8th day. Of course, this is the shrine center that St. Peter's Basilica is built upon. At the time in this time frame, the shrine center was especially important because we know that a wall was built around it to bolster it up and to elongate it around 160 or 180 AD. Another important shrine center was south of the city, right past the catacombs we'll be visiting, here marked with a green circle, called St. Sebastiano, which served for the veneration of Peter and Paul, whose feast or relics may have been at this site as well. These two, Peter and Paul, both martyred in Rome, are certainly considered related. They're the princesses of the apostles, and both were killed in Rome, and their feast day is always celebrated together. So therefore, Christians also visited a shrine center for Paul on the Ostia Way, also south of the city. We will visit the new basilica there, St. Paul outside the wall, and it's very new because it was rebuilt in the 19th century to replace an ancient 4th century basilica, both of which were built over Paul's original cultic shrine. As I reflected on this early Christian architectural history, I thought of places that were of significance in my own life, especially my spiritual life. It also recalled a picture I found in our house after doing some cleanup after the grandchildren left. In this picture, one of our grandkids, and I don't know which one, drew a picture of the world, identified by the basic circle and outlines that outline the land, for instance, and the word WOLD on the top. Then I noticed the plus OMA and the dot in the middle of the picture. In this child's mind, Oma's place is just as significant as the whole world. So we have a phrase for this in theology to describe this phenomenon based upon our understanding of the incarnation. And that is that theology needs a place, or better yet for us here, spirituality needs a place. So to prepare for the pilgrimage, reflect on identifying what place or places from your past do you consider foundational to your faith. It may be a home, a grandparent's house, a church, a retreat center, a place you visited, or a scenic natural wonder, to name a few. And if you were to visit it today, what wisdom would it offer you now? A second question to ask relates directly to the architectural history just covered. After learning more about the inconspicuous places of our Christian ancestors, what aspect of this foundational faith speaks to you today? Consider taking these questions in prayer and examine your past and your present learning. Thank you for your time, and I do hope this helps prepare you for our pilgrimage. God willing, I'll get another video to publish for our next time frame. Feel free to email me with any questions or thoughts. And as they say in Rome, ciao.